We're going live. Okay,
Very good. All right, welcome everybody. Meeting of the SMC, March 29th. We'll start with a roll call from Maryland.
Matt Bowman.
Here.
Rich Gussenberg.
Here.
Ann Harrigan.
Here.
Jim Jinks.
Here.
Andrew Martelli.
Here.
Renee Martinez. Chuck Neff.
Here.
Sylvia Nichols.
Here.
Kate O'Donnell.
Here.
Jeff Pangaro. Anthony Perugini. Don Walsh.
Here.
We have a quorum present.
Very good, thank you. Everybody stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of
United
America,
States of America, and to the
to the
republic,
republic for which it
for which
stands,
One.
one nation, under
under
God,
indivisible,
indivisible, liberty
liberty,
and justice for all.
All right, very good. The next item on the agenda is the approval of meeting minutes from March 17th, 2021. Everybody should have gotten the meeting minutes from Maryland. Is there a motion to approve the meeting
moved.
minutes? Thank you, Sylvia. Second.
Second.
Thank you. I'll go with Jim.
There was a mistake that I saw on it. It said Renee was absent, but Renee was there.
Oh, he must have come in late, Kate. Okay, thank you.
Got it. Correction noted for Renee being there. Is there any other comments, corrections? All right. So we'll need a motion to approve with the correction noted. Is that right? Very good. Anybody?
So moved.
Very good. Thank you, Don. Seconded. Andrew? All in favor of approving the meeting minutes as corrected with Renee in attendance? Anybody opposed? Very good. Unanimously approved. Marilyn?
Hey,
We'll move on to item number 4, which is the review and discussion of the draft report. So to prepare the report, we had provided Colliers with a draft outline and table of contents to work from, and also discussed on several occasions to recommend the single scenario, but provide a secondary option to it in the report. So armed with that, John Coplis from Colliers authored the first draft of the report, which we received from Colliers on Friday afternoon. To the draft report, we got a handful of comments. I had made some comments of my own as well. Reviewed those with John yesterday afternoon, and I believe most, if not all of those comments have been incorporated into the final draft that was sent just before the meeting. There was also a third revision that was sent last night that incorporated most of that as well. I have a copy of the final draft, which I'll share, and we can go through each section and get any final comments on the content as a whole. I think John would say there may still be some grammatical items to clean up and some QA, I guess, from Colliers, but on a whole, we're going to be looking at the final draft and we can comment on the content. Is that right, John? The latest one is the final draft?
That's right, except we'll be excluding the first and the last page. For those who joined late, I apologize again, grabbing too many things there to try to get that out in advance time for tonight's meeting. But yeah, there will be a couple minor tweaks, just probably grammatically. I keep going through and catching things here and there. So for the most part, though, the latest version 4, which was sent at about 10 after 6 this evening, is pretty much all inclusive. It also does include, as I noted, I believe, Jim Jescott's updated just phase 1A cost. That was a request that was placed over the weekend. So that has also been added into the report. But for the most part, yes, Chuck, it is pretty much all there.
Got it. So if I could just kind of summarize the comments that were received through yesterday evening on the draft. There were quite a few comments that sought to clarify details of the scenarios, in particular the land that was proposed to be investigated for new construction. There were some comments for clarification on the enrollments and the space standard. There was a request for further detail of why the recommended scenario was chosen, which also echoes some feedback from the Board of Ed at their meeting last week. There was quite a few requests to include the cash flow scenarios for phase 1 of scenario 6 and 2A, in addition to the cash flow for the full scenario. And then finally, I had some comments to bring it, again, in line with what we had discussed as a committee, for content as far as a recommended scenario, secondary option, and then also asked to elaborate on some of the feedback from the state and the SLR studies. So all of that should be incorporated in the final draft. And I guess we'll just kind of step through that, unless anybody has any final comments, or as opposed to just kind of going through by the sections. We can review the content with the intent we'll proceed with the final draft pending any final comment resolution. Is anybody opposed to that? Very good. Let me try and share my screen here then. I apologize, I may be looking sideways at us a little bit, but that's Zoom life. Right. You guys seeing my report here then? Yes. All right. So I'll go to first, again, the table of contents. I don't think that requires any discussion unless I'm mistaken. The introduction page, Jim, I believe you had some comment on paragraph 3 as far as like why it was recommended, which we'll get into when we get to the scenarios, if you're okay with that. I don't know if there was any other comments on the introduction part of this. And again, I apologize, I can't see everybody here, but let me see.
I mean, my comment had to do with in number 3, the way it was worded previously. The way it was worded, it kind of indicated that both scenarios had done the scoring on both of the final 2 options, which the way it was worded, that isn't quite how it went down. So it looks like it's been refined a little differently now. So it's
Okay.
It's fine.
So you're good with that? Is there any other comments on the introduction page then? Everybody good?
Chuck, you started to make it larger. Is there a way that this can be more
Absolutely.
full screen? Great.
I have the technology here.
No, I'm wondering if I need to do full screen. I mean, I thought I was full screen, but maybe I'm not.
That's as big as I can make it and still make it readable on my end. So is
Thank
that
you.
good? Yep. Again, there shouldn't be a whole lot changed here from what we had seen in the draft on Friday, and then again, even last night, finalized through the final draft today. Is everybody good with the introduction sheet? Last call. Very well.
Can I just comment on what Jim said? Because I agree with him that it reads, I was looking to see if it was changed, and it still reads as if scenario 6 went through that weighted scoring criterion process, and it didn't. Jim, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that what you took
That's what
issue
I
with
was
as
referring.
well?
That's what I was referring to in. That's what I was referring to in the previous draft. I'm just reading it again. I guess, yeah, I mean, I guess it isn't entirely clear. And it seems like that should maybe be spelled out a little bit better. Since only one of the scenarios was actually scored.
Yeah, so what it's doing is in the first paragraph of this third section, it says that there were two scenarios that came out of after we did the scoring process, which leads us to believe that when we start to talk about the two scenarios in the second paragraph of section 3, that those were the two that went through that scoring, and that's not the case.
But it explains it in paragraph 2 where it says it's a derivation of the scenario 1A. So it does explain that. I mean, even though it doesn't completely say number 6 wasn't part of that, it does say it was derived from 1A, which was that.
Yeah, so I guess in general, in the first sentence, it says that the original list of 13 was trimmed to 2 based on a weighted scoring criterion developed by a subcommittee of the SMC. That much is true. We took a list of 13, we came out with 2, and we talked about those for the last several weeks.
Right.
And those 2 selected scenarios were further refined with actual enrollment, budget details, cash flows, and preliminary feedback from the state office, et cetera, et cetera.
But that the explanatory part, a modified scenario 2A. So we selected 1A and 2A, but we're using a modified scenario 2A and a scenario 6, which was a derivation of the original 1A, were further refined. So those were the two. The way I read that is scenario 1A and 2A were the two referred to in the previous paragraph. And then we modified scenario 2A a little bit, and we put in scenario 6, which was a derivation of the original 1A.
At the beginning of
I
that.
guess we actually modified scenario 2A as well there.
The beginning of that paragraph says these.
Yeah,
two
hang on one second.
selected.
Let's go, Andrew. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew, and then Richard.
I was going to say at the end, after SMC of the first paragraph, why don't you put a semicolon in there and put the 2 scenarios that were selected? So just put them right there. Just say,
Right, exactly.
that's it, and then move on.
Scenario 1A and 2A,
1A,
or whatever.
2A, period.
Right.
Rich, did you want to make a comment there?
Yeah, I mean, it then says these 2 selected scenarios, but they weren't those 2 selected scenarios. So the next paragraph, beginning sentence has to be changed in some way, just to clarify what happened.
I thought that was done by the parentheses. So the 2 selected scenarios were one was the modified of the 2A, and the 6, which was a derivation of 1A. So I think that's an attempt to explain that, but maybe it could be clearer.
Yeah, my problem is where, we say scenario 1A and 2A in the first paragraph, and then we say these 2 selected scenarios. It wasn't those 2. And I understand that 6 is a modification, but I think it's unclear, that's all.
So can we?
What if we struck this and we just kind of put down here that they were these 2 selected scenarios, because that's referring to 1A and 2A here, were further refined, blah, blah, blah. And then we say, and became scenario 2A and 6A.
Yeah, that would work.
Is that acceptable to everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that necessarily spells out that one was part of the weighted scoring criterion, one was, but.
Yeah, so in fairness, scenario 2A as it stands right now wasn't part of the scoring system. If we go back and look at what it included, it actually had like a 300 enrollment K through 5 as the Chapman instead of the 515 that we have now. So if the issue, I guess, is with the scoring, which we can talk about, like why it was recommended in the section later on. I mean, if the committee wants, we could go back and score both of them on the same criteria as well. with the actual budgets and information that we have now. Again, go
Can I
ahead.
just, I would say that that is what the Board of Ed is asking for.
Okay.
So we should do that, maybe.
Does anybody else have any
What are
comment,
they,
I guess?
what are they asking for? I don't understand that.
For us to score those two scenarios that we have now on that rubric that we created to show the importance, those elements that were important for us in
To
determining.
rescore it again, or to go back to the
Yes.
original?
Yeah, hang on a second, if I could, for clarity, and just keep this kind of organized. So I believe the board is requesting that we had used a scorecard to whittle the scenarios from 13 down to what we had as 2. That was done in December. There was 4 criteria at the top. They were weighted. I think what the board is asking is if we could do the same scoring for the scenarios as they are now on that same criteria. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
That was what came up our last meeting.
Well, that's what I heard when I watched the meeting, right?
And I think that would clarify this scenario refinement, and we can include that in the recommendation. Is anybody opposed to doing that?
I think it would,
No,
I think it would make it cleaner, yeah.
I agree.
agreed.
Agreed.
Is anybody opposed? Okay, good.
Do you want a motion for that, Chuck, or do you think we don't need one?
I
You
don't think
need a
we, yeah, I don't think we need a motion for it. What I'll do is I'll put together that same scorecard, Excel sheet. I'll shoot it out to everybody. If we could get it back by the end of the day, Wednesday, so that Colliers can incorporate it where we say in the report, and then we'll just include it as the final. I'll copy everybody on the results and go from there. Does that work?
Works for me.
Very good.
Thanks,
So
Chuck.
yep, I will highlight this and I will reword that.
Can I just ask one question though?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Don.
Since last week we chose the scenario we're going forward with.
Yes.
Why are we going to go back and do all of that again for a scenario that we didn't choose? I'm a little confused. I think it's just going to be taking more time for us, and I'm not sure what it's going to accomplish. I mean, if the grades come out differently, are we going to go back and change what we're going to recommend then, or?
No, I think the recommendation has already been made. Again, it was 9-3 in favor of scenario 6 as the recommendation. I don't think that's going to change. I think what we do lack, and we'll get to there in the report itself, is some reasons why. Last week we had just kind of voted. We didn't get into real details why. I think we all have our reasons why we may have voted one way or another, but I think we need to illustrate that in the report, and I think that's what the intent of scoring them would be.
Okay.
But I come back to Don's comment. What if the scoring comes out the opposite? I mean, we're doing things backwards here. And
Yeah.
Well, we've done a lot of things backwards, Richard. But I mean, I think we're at the point now where we're up against the clock, and we need to push something forward. But I think by doing that, if it does come out differently, so be it. I mean, it'll just still go forward.
Yeah, I will say that in the scenario or the scorecard that we had done before as well, there was not a score input for the financial, which carried a weight in that scorecard rubric of 20. That would still be left blank at this point. We have the cash flow analysis. That would be kind of input, I guess, from Jim Jascott. I don't think it's fair for him to weigh in on a ranking of it, but I think as we discussed with the budgets, there is a phase 1 cost difference. A total cost is pretty similar, but that's a score that would affect the total for either scenario in the end.
Yeah, I think that I mean, whatever the scoring comes out to be, I do think that we have 2 proposals here that the public will want to read. And I think they'll want to kind of see what the differences are down the line. I mean, each step of the way. So at least having the scoring there, gives us some context.
I would add that the Board of Ed really wanted to see two scenarios. They questioned why we have one recommended and then a backup. So I think as much detail as we can give as to why we have one recommended and a backup, we should offer that. We should put it in our report.
But we had voted
questions
on
are
that.
allowed. We had agreed to have a recommended scenario, and we agreed to have a alternate or a secondary scenario. So we're not going to go back on what we've decided through the last several meetings, but we can certainly add some additional content for clarity in the report if that's what we need to do. All right, is everybody good with the scorecard again? I'll shoot that out, get that back Wednesday, and include the results from it.
Yep.
Very good. Moving on to why modernization section here. First in A talks about the 21st century educational goals. John Copeless, did you want to add I know you had some comments of maybe beefing this up a little bit with the mechanical systems and information on the mechanical systems and maybe even the technology piece to elaborate a little
Right.
bit here.
Yeah, there was in talking with Chuck earlier today, Chuck Warrington, Chuck number 2, there was some discussion there with respect to elaborating further on that, sort of getting into some of the more specifics with respect to the buildings themselves, such as the security components, the fact a lot of the window systems are single paned, roof systems, et cetera. Just to elaborate further on some of the existing conditions, which again can be addressed, further in the report as well. But that was something that we were talking about, sort of embellishing this section a little bit with some of that information.
If I could just point out a typo
Certainly.
in the first paragraph. The district's education goals are met, that last line. Shouldn't that apostrophe be before the S?
Yeah, maybe so.
It's only one district, right?
Yes.
Again, hopefully we can forgive some grammar errors and or typos if they are not critical to the content that's in the piece, and hopefully they are caught in the QA of Colliers on this part. But go ahead, Kate. I saw your hand, and then Rich after that.
In looking at the first two sentences of the first paragraph, it looks like the first thing we're mentioning, which seems to be the most important thing, is keeping up with other districts. And I really think that second sentence about the enrollment demand and our educational goals is more important than keeping up with trends. So I'd almost like if we could flip-flop those two sentences so that people know what our focus is when it comes to our educational goals.
Comment. Thank you, Kate.
I agree with that, Kate. I think as we go through council things too, we try not to compare. We want to get a sense of where we are in the marketplace, but we really try to make decisions that are important for the town of Cheshire first as it relates into the general thing. So just simply changing the order of that sentence, it rapidly evolved over the years. School modernization is necessary, and also we want to keep in sync with other school systems. But yes, yeah, I agree. Just same content, but just reversed.
Thank you, Sylvie. Go ahead, Rich.
Just a comment for John. If you go to the survey that we did, there was one section in there that listed a lot of different variables and what people supported. So for instance, I'm looking at it now, improving IT or technology was number 1, improving air quality and ventilation was number 2. I think there are some items there that could be picked out and put into this section.
Sure. Thanks, Rich.
Chuck, if I may, I was thinking traffic as well. Access to the buildings, security. I know that, like Rich, I was going to make that same suggestion that Rich made, pulling right from the things that were germane to the folks that did the survey. Thanks.
Is there any other comments on the first section of why modernization here? Is everybody good? Edits here, I think, are worthy. As far as the additional content that you're going to include, John, can we expect like a bulleted list maybe by school of some highlights from that, or what is the actual content? Because again, the idea is this is the final draft of the report, so we don't want to drastically change the content that is included here prior to the committee seeing it.
Right. No, it would probably be, one paragraph, a couple sentences. I don't know if it'd be bulleted per se, or it may, to Rich's point, take some of those items from that survey and list those as a bullet, bullet section there. But I don't see, this being expanded, too much more than it already is. If that's your question.
Yeah, I just want to make sure this doesn't look dramatically different in the final report from what we're looking at here. If we're just talking about adding a couple items from the list, I think we're good. Right, moving on to the existing building conditions then. Included the existing building data, which was presented at the meeting early on. Again, I don't recall seeing any comments to these pages here. Is there any final comments on the existing building conditions as they are? Go ahead, Kate.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jim, you can go after that.
Yep,
Sorry,
that's
just
fine.
the wording in the sentence that starts furthermore, it's all nouns until the last phrase, which is not a noun. I just wanted to know if that could be reworded so it was more consistent.
Very good. Thank you, Jim. Go ahead.
I think John's English teacher would be really disappointed.
That's my father too. So yeah.
The only comment I had here was the 21st century learning model. I don't, if someone's reading that, they don't necessarily know what that means. I'm wondering if we can just spell that out a little bit or something.
Elaborate on the 21st century learning model.
Yeah, just because people will be reading this that don't know. I'm not sure I could even necessarily do a good job of explaining what that means. So,
Or maybe if we use 21st century learning environment from the prior page, do you think that would clarify it?
I think using environment in place of model is, if you don't want to be more specific and explain what you mean by that model, then just saying the environment is a good way to fix that.
I agree.
So we could just simply replace learning model with learning environment.
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is there could we add a few more words there just to sort of give people a sense of what it means?
I think the intent is if we call learning environment, we're tying it back into the previous page where we talked about 21st century educational goals. Is that, am I reading that right?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, I don't think we do know what we mean by 21st century learning model. So therefore, it makes more sense to go back and say, call it the learning environment that we were talking about before.
Right.
Can I just say I'm loving this annotation program that you have going here, Chuck?
Bluebeam, an engineer's best friend, Dan.
That is fantastic.
All right. Again, I don't think I saw anything on the state recommendations section. Was there any final comment there? Go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to make this accurate, it's 2021, and I think you need to add 1 year to all the age of the buildings and the existing data. I don't know how far you guys want to nitpick this thing, but every one of those ages is off by a year. We are in 2021 right now.
Good catch, Matt. Thank you. Good through section C of why modernization here. All right. Go ahead, Kate. Sorry.
The first bullet on the top of the page, shouldn't
Yes.
it be estimated?
Yeah, I got you. Maybe so. All right, section D gets into the enrollment projections. This looks a little bit different than the draft, but it includes all of the enrollments that we've looked at, starting first with the elementary schools, and then this additional chart was added as far as how they are broken down with the in the tables that follow, just for clarity. Hang on, I gotta turn a light on in here. Sorry about that. So again, these are the same tables that we looked at before. Go ahead, Kate.
There's like a lot of data on a lot of these pages. And one thing, as I was looking through it again tonight, I'm thinking we need to kind of really clarify things for the town council and the board. So we have this chart that says in 2930, we're going to have 2,700 kids. And then we have a chart saying our capacity is 2,518, but then we don't make a statement to connect those two pieces of data so they understand what our decision making was when it came to deciding to have bigger schools and that we needed more space. I would just like to see that clarified on that page so they didn't have to find it elsewhere.
Yes, thanks, Kate. Don't make us do math.
So I'll say here to include a statement as far as the enrollment projection versus the capacity. It should just be a simple statement there, I think.
Right.
Go ahead, Rich. I see your hand next.
Yeah, the term functional capacity can be confusing at times. And as we go through this, I think we need to take a look. We have functional capacity here in the charts. We just have capacity and target. And then later on, there's a thing that says functional capacity and then parentheses 90% and gives a different number. So I think we need to clarify what is functional capacity versus our target capacity. And then we need to be consistent as we go through.
Got it. So we'll clarify what the functional capacity is here, which I believe is down here. The functional capacity projected for each, and it's essentially taking, or it's basing it on an average class size of 20 to 21 for regular ed, 10 to 15 for special ed and pre-K.
Yeah. But then you'll see on some of the following pages.
Yep.
It's a little unclear at times.
Got it. So comment to John then would be just make sure we're using functional capacity as a single definition. And if it's something else, we'll come up with a term and define that.
And the functional capacity is the actual number of students that can fit in the school, right? Or it's.
So the functional capacity is calculated based on the number of classrooms that are in the school.
Yeah.
They take 20 to 21 or multiply that out. And then for the special education and pre-K classes, they take 10 to 15 depending on what it is. And that's where you come up with the functional capacity. Is that right, John?
That is correct, yes.
So that's like the max number of students you can fit in the school.
In a perfect world.
In a perfect world, if you
yes.
filled every single homeroom with 21 students and then every special ed class or pre-K class with 10 to 15, whatever that number is, then yes, that is the number that you could fit there. All right. Is there any other final comments there on what's being shown? Good. So on the next is the tables that we've looked at. This was included in the SLR report, and the idea of that previous table was to clarify what these lines are. So the top line being that what is called out as the functional capacity, and then this target capacity being 90% of that number. So those numbers match what is in the previous table, and that was again to try and clarify what's going on. Again, similar on Dodd and the high school. You know, looking at this, John. Yeah, okay, we're good. So these are the projections for Dodd and the high school. And again, the functional capacity is calculated using an average class size of 20 at the middle school, 17 at the high school. Take the total number of grade level classrooms, and that's where the numbers come from as far as a target or functional capacity.
Functional, right.
One thing that's not included here, John, and I don't know if it makes sense to add it or not, or if anybody has any thoughts, but we don't show a target capacity, I guess, on these ones where we do on the others. So in the case of this one, it'd be whatever that is, 815. I don't know if it makes sense to maybe just add a line or something in the chart.
For consistency, sure. We could look at doing that.
John, would you use the same target at a high school level where you've got different classes being scheduled and things like that? Usually, I've been told 80% is used at most high schools.
To be honest, Rich, I'd have to question SLR on that to confirm, but I think it may be a different factor there, yes. But I'll verify with them, and then depending on their response, we'll show a target line on those two graphs.
Okay.
Got it. I mean, you are using a different number, I guess, from the others, but
Well, that's class size, but also
Class size is
if
a
you're
different
scheduling
factor.
in a high school, you can't schedule every room at all times. So you end up, it's very hard to fill a high school.
Correct. Yeah, and you have a lot of different programs and labs and things too.
got it. I think just for consistency, you get with them, put a target line on those, we should be good. Oh, sorry, Kate.
Can we do the same thing on the bottom of this one where, now that we've looked at elementary and middle school and high school, just that statement that clearly we have an elementary enrollment issue that we're trying to resolve so that, just kind of review or summarize what we've learned from these?
I think it was actually stated in that SLR, but I'll just good. Just add a summary statement. I believe, again, that was kind of included in that SLR presentation if we want to be consistent with what we've seen. Everybody good on the enrollment piece? Very good.
If I could,
Yeah.
during the presentation, is the thought that we're going to go through the charts and they're going to talk about the functional capacity and what years the elementary schools are going to run out of space, or should we have like a bulleted box that shows that versus just the charts, just as kind of like a Reader's Digest view of this?
Gotcha. You're thinking include a table that kind of shows when you're out of capacity or when you're beyond the target capacity for each school.
Right. as to why, that's kind of one of the reasons why we made the decision that we're making, so it's just clearly shown out. Versus if you're looking at slide 7 and, you're just looking at this information for the first time and you don't know how to really interpret it, it's going to be kind of difficult to see that.
SLR had a bulleted list, Chuck, that you might just be able to copy and paste out of their original report.
Gotcha. John, I'll leave the comment as that. You can,
Yeah, no problem. I've taken notes as well, so.
okay. Last call for the enrollment and projection. Okay. Onto the space standard. Again, I think John, there was some comments here. I believe you kind of annotated how to calculate this. I think this will be a big part in the presentation itself, just kind of going through what this entails. Was there any comments on the space standard calculation? Anybody? Go ahead, Kate.
So this says I know it's just here as an example, but it says it's for one of the elementary schools, but I don't see an elementary school with a 8-year enrollment projection of 570 and 2728. On the next page, we have the list, but what school is this?
To be honest, Kate, there were so many of these. I grabbed one and I'm not sure which one it was. It was one of the elementary schools and it may have been one of the earlier scenarios.
It looks like it's the K through 5 from scenario 2A, which maybe we should update it just to represent. Okay. Yeah. If we could update it to be a K through 6 that's actually used in scenario 6.
Good
Would
catch.
be opposed to that? So we ask that they update the example here to reflect an actual scenario an actual school from scenario 6. Is that good?
Yeah, and Chuck Warrington, and we'll annotate it which one it is below, just so it's clear.
Yep, sounds good. Is there any other comments on the space standard?
Yeah, Chuck, we're going to modify the steps up above a little bit. Those need to be tweaked.
Yeah, I think I had commented on that too.
Some of the,
yep.
They don't really have anything to do with functional capacity. They're really they're state driven. So we're going to modify those to properly reflect that.
Very good. Anything else on the space standard as far as why modernization? I believe we're still in here. Seeing none. All right. So then from the space standard, we do kind of have a summary of what's going on for each of these here. Again, we're good. Is there any comments on this final sheet? I don't believe there was a lot of change here, but I may be wrong. Go ahead, Kate.
On the top of E and F, it says MMI capacity. Is that for Milone and McBroom? And should we use functional capacity?
So this is actually the target capacity. It's that 90% of the functional that we had before. And I think that's what Rich was referring to as far as it being used differently throughout. So maybe I'll just circle this here.
Yeah, we'll clarify that.
Yeah, the MMI capacity, I was like, MMI capacity, what does that mean?
That was Milone and McBroom, I believe, but.
Right.
Yeah, it's formally Milone and McBroom, but we'll clarify this, Kate, to align those so that we're talking apples to apples.
Maybe just strike through that MMI into capacity versus utilization or target capacity, whatever. And then I think on the original version, there may have been a bust in one of the formulas in the cells here. That was corrected on these later versions. John, is that right?
Yes, that's been updated, Chuck, corrected.
All right, was there any other comments on this section? The summary from the data? Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, me again.
Nah, don't be shy.
I think this paragraph at the end is a really good summary of all the prior slides, but I kind of want to like highlight these things. Is there any way of taking these elements and maybe making it into a bulleted list?
Yeah, I mean, just the presentation of it, looking at it, listed out. When you're saying a list, I mean, what are you saying? Would it be included in the list?
That we need new and renovated school facilities, that we have anticipated enrollment growth, we have necessary code and safety upgrades, we need to modernize and transition the existing school system to meet our learning objectives. Like those are, people don't read paragraphs, you know, they kind of skim through it. So I was thinking if we made it a bulleted list, it would just, you know, garner a little more attention.
Come back to Andrew's original comment about, you know, hitting people in the head with certain things, making them very clear.
Got it. So a general comment I'll just make here. Got it. So really just kind of presenting that a little bit differently into a bulleted list. John, Chuck, you guys good to that?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, good idea.
Very good. That is the end of the why modernization. Now we get into the scenario discussion. Again, the first sheet presents just the general description. We talk about the scoring criterion here that were used to whittle down the 13 to 2. Is there any comments on this sheet before it gets into the details of these scenarios? Go ahead, Kate.
I do have to say, one of my notes was to take out all the little acronyms and spell them out. So I'm glad to see them all spelled out here. I'm glad you guys caught that. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. We use acronyms all the time and people have no idea what they mean.
Yeah, and
Good.
also maybe a few definitions, Kate, like when we talk about CIP versus, on the very bottom there, capital improvement plans versus renovations. Well, what does that mean? You know, and Chuck and I, we were talking earlier, like what's the audience here that we're trying, you know, we can tend to talk very technical and just kind of defining what those are. It's like capital improvement, really the maintenance plan, the 5-year, 10-year maintenance plan versus a major project, one singular project to upgrade a facility, something along those lines.
And to that point, Chuck, your comment was to kind of define what renovation means, because it's a little bit different than what some may think, I guess, right?
Yeah, well, if I'm a taxpayer, you know, a resident in town, and I'm reading this, and well, what's the difference between the two of these? It to the layperson, they may not even, you know, understand that. So, but definitely
Understood.
renovation in a statutory text is 20-year like new life of a building is really the intent there.
Got it. Is there anything else on the first sheet of this scenario discussion? Got it. So again, this gets into a little bit of the process details, kind of where we were at initially, the steps we kind of took to get down to 2. Talks about scenario 6, how that came about, and then also the feedback from the state has been included as well. Is there any comment on the details here? I can zoom in if everybody wants to peep, because this is a little bit different than before.
Chuck, it's Marilyn. Could I just make a suggestion? I'm sure Kate might agree. The list that you have after the March 11th, 2021 is second meeting. You've got commas after each of the bullets. And then you go down further near the end and you have a period after the last bullet. So I would either put a period after each bullet grammatically.
I'm not following you.
The very bottom of that page, go all the way to the
Very
bottom,
bottom of
Chuck.
the page with the
Oh,
scenario.
gotcha.
Yeah, you've got commas here and there. So,
Oh.
but you've got a period like after 900 would be a recommended max. So, I mean,
Yeah, I gotcha.
it doesn't flow grammatically.
Got it.
Okay, sorry, but
I had one other little thing for that page too.
Sure.
Offline is a compound word. And we have it as two separate words.
yep, it's a one word. I noticed that too.
Where are we looking?
Darcy and Chapman are taken offline. Second bullets.
Yep.
Up.
Ah, gotcha.
Yep.
Ah,
And then the third bullet of scenario 2.
Mhm.
Repeated, yeah.
I was wondering, is that a little misleading to say that? Because weren't we talking about the Chapman's not going offline if we're just replacing it?
so it reads new, in this one, it reads new in K through 6 elementary school was to replace Chapman. Again, this was what was scenario 1A initially.
Yeah.
Then
But
Darcy and
is
Chapman are
it
taken
just
offline.
is it just a new Chapman or is it?
No, not in that scenario.
Depends if you name it that, because this one was the one that's up north. But in the scenario 2, I think the third bullet, we would just say Darcy taken offline because the discussions, I believe, was a K5 on the Chapman property, if I remember correct.
It would be to investigate that, and
We have to
if not,
investigate
then
it,
yeah.
but I think the
Right.
assumption initially was that. So totally up to you how you want to put that.
I guess I don't have that much of a problem with it because you call it Chapman each time. So I think people make the distinction that, yeah, Chapman's taken offline, but it's there in another form.
It was a new Chapman.
Yeah.
And I think we had done that because we were thinking about financially all of the capital improvement projects that would have had to happen at those schools that are now coming off. That I recall some kind of discussion about that when we were talking about taking those schools, quote unquote, offline, because the building itself comes offline.
I think it's also very important for the Chapman parents to see that we're not just eliminating Chapman, we're building a new Chapman and then closing down the other one. So a little more sellable.
Maybe where we say Darcy and Chapman are taken offline, we should say Darcy and Chapman buildings are taken offline.
That'd be fine.
Huh? Good.
I think that's nicer, actually. Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
You're
Yeah,
going
then-
to, whoops, I'm sorry. Under scenario 2A, phase 2 and 3, it talks about CIP. I know we had that earlier, but is that going to be clear to people what that means?
That is the intent of including it in a bracket so that you don't have to define it again. But
Mhm.
I mean, we could spell it out if,
No, it's up to the committee, but I just,
My understanding is that you do it the first time and then you're
you're
good to
free to
go.
use it whenever. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Okay.
just got to tell people they got to keep up.
We'll read it carefully, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Very good. Keep this moving here then. So again, that kind of tells a story of what we had started with, how they evolved into the final scenarios here, revised scenario 2A and scenario 6, which again was mentioned now in the introduction, like we talked about, spells it out what we've talked about as far as the phase 1 inclusions in here. Let me get that for us. And
That'll all be typical, yeah.
this should represent the final scenarios of both scenario 2A and 6 as it is. And then finally, the recommendation, again, highlighting the recommended scenario, scenario 6. And here's where we can include the results of the score. As discussed earlier, is there any additional comments? Rich, I see your hand first, and then Kate. Go ahead, Rich.
A couple of things. Under scenario 6, phase 2 and 3, says Norton is demolished. Norton would have to be demolished in phase 1 as soon as the new building's built if it's on the same property. So
Yeah,
then
if
that-
it's on the same, if it's on that site, correct, Rich?
Yeah, so that would be a phase 1 piece. It doesn't mention Chapman. Well, actually, it talks about Chapman up above, taken offline. So that's okay. The only other thing which, we've talked about a couple of times is we always have put down the high school and possibly Dodd as renovation. And we've never looked into what the cost of renovation versus new school would be and what the issue would be in terms of trying to renovate the high school while students are there. So I had suggested at one point that, at this late date, and it's something that's way down the line, but at least to put like an asterisk after renovations to the high school and put something along the lines of, as future phases are planned, a study should be conducted to determine both cost and student disruption for renovation versus new construction. Obviously, we're not going to do a study of that at this point in time, but I wouldn't want to mislead the town to think that automatically we're doing renovation, and then somewhere down the line we decide that, or somebody decides that that's not appropriate.
Does anybody disagree with that? I guess as far as the high school and Dodd, if we put an asterisk next to them, I agree. It's obviously too late to go back and do anything with the costs on them. I think we've included them similarly in both options. So one's not favored the other on the high school, but we could certainly make mention, as Rich suggests. Anybody against that? Okay. Chuck, John, you guys are clear what I'm doing here, yeah?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Go ahead, Kate.
I'm going to go back to the Highland as CIP because I noticed on the prior page in scenario 2A, we had Highland listed as a CIP. And then we had talked about it for both 6 or 2A. And then all of a sudden on the next page, it's a renovation. I think we just need to be consistent across the scenarios because we didn't change 2A from one to the next and say Highlands a CIP, now Highlands a reno. I think that that makes it look confusing. I think it all needs to be the same.
That is in line with what we've talked about, so I'll just make that.
Will that change the numbers though too? What numbers did they use for that?
So Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, because I believe we had talked about this, is the CIP cost is really an unknown for Highland. So in the initial, I believe you'd use like 30 and 45 as like a low and a high end of the district share for that. Then when you did the renovation for it, the renovation cost came in just slightly higher than that 45, if I'm not mistaken. So you'd kept it as renovation. Is that correct? Or
I'm not sure if it's exactly that, but renovation is generally more conservative in that you're renovating their entire facility to a 20-year like new, whereas CIP is typically you're doing alterations, you're doing more of a maintenance plan here. John, what in our analysis, can you confirm what we have in our analysis for Highlands?
I think we carried renovation costs, but let me check.
Let's just check that to confirm. That bouncing kind of back and forth a little bit, especially on Highland.
Yeah.
It's in better shape. So, I mean,
Thought as a high number for Highland for renovation, we had 40 and the CIP number was 25. But I could be mistaken.
gotcha. Yeah.
I think it was
Number
like,
fatigue on them.
I think we assume 1.5 to 2.5 million per year. I mean, it could vary depending on year to year.
Gotcha. To
Yeah,
Kate's
we
point, I
had
guess what
carried-
we've.
oh,
Go ahead, John.
I was just saying, we had carried renovation costs. I think we were looking to address it as like sort of a worst case scenario, so that we would have numbers in there that would be, reflecting the renovations to both Doolittle and Highland.
Got it. Question, I guess, would be, Kate, we've included this line now as future phases are planned and study conducted to determine actual construction. If we've carried a renovation for both, it doesn't necessarily hurt one versus the other. You think we can leave it as is and we'll just add the asterisk to this one as well?
On the prior page, can you change it so it's consistent? See, on this one, if you go down the prior page, it says CIP to Highland. Can you just make that consistent so it all looks the same?
Yeah, let's change that to Highland, John.
Change it to renovation.
Change it, renovation.
Yeah. Yeah, it was 15 million for the low and 25 for the high on when we looked at the CIP, but
Is anybody opposed to those clarifications there? Should be good, yes. All right, again, for the recommendation, this would be an area to add any additional factors outside of the scorecards, which we'll include. Again, last week we had just kind of taken a vote. We didn't really get into detail of the why on the factors. So if there's anything anybody would like to add to this section, we can certainly add it of why a vote for scenario 6 versus 2A as a recommendation. Is there any comments to that? Go ahead, Kate.
Not sure that belongs here or on the page at the end where we do conclusions and recommendations, section 5. That's that section. I was like, there's no why here. There's no, like, it just seemed really thin. And I was wondering if this would be the place where we can like maybe do a table and compare the two scenarios with percentage redistricting, phase 1 costs, OSCGNR recommendations, the school sizes, like kind of put in some of that data from all the prior pages into this conclusions and recommendations to kind of beef up and explain to them why we're recommending this scenario.
Got it. So just for a point of order then, if we're not talking about it here, maybe we could strike this from this section and we'll cover that when we get to the recommendation. Does that make sense?
Or just leave the point that we voted here and then explain why later.
Gotcha. So in this, we'll just leave it at school modernization. Is everybody good with that? The recommendation part will beef up in the latter section.
Great idea.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
One of the things that I think should be also added is in this scenario that we're recommending is at least 3 out of the 4 oldest school buildings will be shuttered. And, you know, us being the school modernization committee, you know, to remove at least 3 of the 4 oldest buildings is an important factor here.
Yes. Thank you, Donna. I made a note. We'll when we get to the recommendation section, we'll bulletize that with some other stuff as well. Thank you, Don. Anybody else? Any final comments here as far as the presentation of the final 2? Good. All right, then into the parcel review. So again, this gives a high level of what we had looked at for the parcels. It talks about an initial list that was provided, how that was trimmed down to a list of 4 properties that met the criteria of acreage and land use, which is included on this next sheet. One comment was to call out what these properties were. It wasn't called out previously. That's called out now up above. And then again, the discussion as far as what costs to carry in the scenarios, looking at a private parcel as well, and just using a plug cost for those. So I know it is 3 slides there, but does anybody have any comments on the land use parcel review content as a whole?
Yeah, Chuck, can you go just to the page where we have the highlighted yellow values?
Yes.
So again, just want to point out for the committee, we're going to modify up at the top the description. This exercise was purely to come up with an estimated value for a placeholder for if we were to purchase parcels for the schools, because we're not sure until, you know, if we have to purchase one, it's not, if they're viable. We didn't study them. It was purely on a size of the acreage, size of a lot that, you know, with a minimum lot size of, you know, we're saying 17 acres for the elementary school. So we tried to get there close there too and go, what was the amount? That's all that exercise was for. It wasn't say it's viable, wasn't say we can build it, purely to carry in a budget.
Got it. One point I wanted to clarify on here, as well as the K through 5, it should also read the K through 6 if we're talking about the North End school.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Jim Jinks, I saw your hand.
Yeah, should we be at all concerned about putting this into the public document, given that I imagine someone could figure out perhaps the pieces of property we're talking about, even though it's just for an exercise, it still kind of puts things on a radar that maybe we're not really intending to do. So do we really want to include this in the report?
Go ahead, Matt.
That's exactly what I was going to say also. It wouldn't take much. I mean, we spoke about it publicly. These are public records for all intents and purposes, but I don't think you need to put this page in there at all. It's very easy to go through the GIS map and checker and figure out which parcels these are.
So if we just X out the table and leave it as the summary that we have down below, is that good with everybody?
I just delete the whole table and just keep it in narrative form as long as the committee's okay with it.
I would
Yeah,
be fully supportive of that. You're right, Jim, because it would be public conversation very quickly. So.
I just knew Matt was going to say it anyway, so I just jumped ahead of him there. So.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for taking my, I've been very quiet, Jim, and now, you know, you're going to wake me up now.
Feeling all the thunder.
No, I agree.
Got it. And yeah, Chuck, you'll beef it up a little bit as far as, you know, this is really just a cost analysis, and then
Yeah, I
a
just
further
think we wanna
study
be-
would follow.
Yeah, because I don't want someone to imply that, you know, we analyze this many parcels or, you know, they're totally random just to get cost for the budget as a placeholder. And that's all it was.
Very good. Go ahead, Kate.
That's kind of my concern with the prior page with the map, is that people are going to think that we're recommending that Bartlam Park be where we put a school, or Cheshire Park, like that. That was part of the conversation the last time that we went through this process as a town. And I wouldn't want people to misunderstand and saying that we're identifying these as good places to put a school. Really, the exercise was to see, are there potential properties, or should we be estimating a cost for a property? So I'm not sure. Can we just use the list and strike the map to kind of de-emphasize it a little bit? So it's more about the text of the exercise that we went through to figure out a price.
Go ahead, Matt.
You know, I think if we just spell out someplace that these are not recommendations, that these were just the parcels that would fit our needs, and in no way, shape, or form are we recommending any of these parcels at this time.
Totally agree.
No, I'm on the school map. I'm sorry. The Cheshire, from the
Yep.
list, the following 4 properties.
Yeah, I'm gonna copy it over there.
Okay, all right.
You may want to
Okay.
keep these documents as a potential content for executive session or something. But
Well, town properties, you don't need executive session, but
true, that's true. That's true.
And let's not forget, this meeting is a public meeting, so people can see it anyway.
exactly.
True. I guess I was thinking more of the parcel analysis page, but
Yeah.
All right, so the edits we kind of talked about here, and we're good with the parcel review portion. Very well. And then again, this kind of gets into the steps, phases, talks about the budgets for each, how that was developed as far as the enrollment, figuring in cost, square footage, etc. Was there any comments on this section? I can zoom in again, sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, just a little grammar thing. In the IE, I don't understand why some things are capitalized and some things are not. It doesn't, nothing there is a proper noun, except maybe project design, but I don't know. Shouldn't they all be lowercase?
John will go over the grammar.
We'll take care of that, Kate.
All right. Is there anything else? I think this was pretty straightforward there. Nick, go ahead.
And you need an and before the last phrase in the last one. The anticipated high and low range in the second paragraph. You did a list and you forgot the and on the last one.
Gotcha. Hang on a second. Where?
Right before the anticipated. You go into your right,
There we go.
All right, before the,
right before the, there
Right
you go.
there.
Before what? The.
All right. Very good. This next sheet was just an example taken from the new elementary school north of scenario 6. And the intent is just to show how you were putting together the budget, if I'm not mistaken. John, Chuck.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, this is an example. Yeah, that's all it is purely example to see what is it we're taking into account in these budgets so people can see that they're total project budgets, they're except the financing costs, those are not included, but
Yep.
Some people may ask where did we come up with these and how did we come up with them? At least this gives an example of that.
I would just make a comment about that first. It states that this is an example, but I might put that in bolder letters or capital letters or something because it's easy to skim through one of these and miss that an example. This is just a sample scenario.
We'll clean up the
Yeah,
display
just
on
make
it
sure
as
it's
well.
quite
So it
clear that
looks
this is
not-
an example.
And maybe include a watermark over it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could do that.
More than the
Yeah.
draft.
Yeah.
Matt and then Kate. Go ahead, Matt.
If this is just an idea of a new elementary school, do we have to say north?
No,
No,
not necessarily. I think they had just taken it from their information they had, but we can make it a more general example. Is that right, Chuck?
I think, in my
Sure.
opinion, it should be anyway.
Yeah, well, this was taken from scenario 6, so this is just one of them. We have probably 5 or 6 of these for each scenario. So we just grab the random one. We can put whatever you want on it, to.
I think new elementary school is perfect. Just take north off.
Okay.
I mean, again, that's my opinion of however many people on the committee.
I think a change like that doesn't really change the content of it. I don't think it matters if it doesn't say north, unless anybody feels strongly.
The only reason
Otherwise-
this is north because of the specific enrollment. That's the reason that's north.
Gotcha.
That's all
I think if we
our
leave it
Right.
just as new elementary school and throw sample across there instead of draft and bold that it's a sample or an example up above, I think we're covering everything we're talking about.
I agree.
Kate, you had a comment?
Well, Matt's comment was one of mine, so thank you, Matt. My second one was underneath it, the title is cut off. Can you fix that so you can actually read the title or remove it completely? It's just like CT, it's probably project. I don't know.
No, we're gonna modify all
Yeah, that's
these
gonna be
graphs, Kate, to
adjusted.
clean these up,
Okay.
the figures for sure. No, agree, and then that right border on the right, we'll clean that out just so it's fresh and it's not distorted.
Got it. Make sure I didn't skip a page here, right? Yeah, so off of the projected budget, it goes into a schedule, and I believe the schedule is included on its own sheet now, just because it was a little small previously. Is that right?
correct. Yes.
Yeah, and this one, I guess, yeah, because we turned it vertical, I think, on the next page, John.
Correct. Just to try to enlarge the size of it.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'd like to keep this in 11 by 17 format if we can. We'll work on that, John. So when we're seeing the PDF, otherwise someone's got to rotate it. We'll work on customizing that for the final, just so it gets in a landscape format.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking on my comment. I think I had commented on that. It's just making 11 by 17, and then in the actual printed report, it could just be like a
Just
flyout
fold it
page
in.
or whatever.
Yeah, you could just fold it over in half and fold it back again.
Is there any comments on the schedule stuff? Anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, it's another grammar thing. Where it says projects itself, all of the scenarios contain multiple projects. So shouldn't it say projects themselves? It should be plural because every scenario is multiple projects. Right?
You're asking the wrong person.
Yes. Yes. Eliminate the
Yeah, Marilyn.
projects. I mean, make it
Themselves.
projects plural themselves
Yes, yep.
or the projects themselves.
Got it.
And then we'll modify it. So John, let's put a note to just modify, it says, through geotechnical, let's spell out preliminary geotechnical investigations and hazardous materials. We'll expand upon that just so it's clear. In parentheses there, Chuck. Yeah, we'll just spell that out so nobody's gonna know what geotech means.
And then projects becomes plural everywhere.
Yeah.
All right, on the schedule itself, as you said, try and do this.
We'll make that 11 by 17 too, Chuck.
Schedule itself shows details of kind of what goes on as far as phase one with the design phase, construction, etc.
Yeah, this would be,
There's a lot to go.
yeah, this could change, but just gives
General idea.
the reader a general idea of the life cycle of a project and what to expect, but depending on the size of it, could vary. So.
Okay. Go ahead, Rich.
If we're recommending scenario 6, why are we putting in a schedule for scenario 2A?
It says scenario 6 at the
Oh,
top.
That is
I'm
schedule
looking at
6.
an older version. It said 2A.
Yeah.
In mine.
Yeah, we probably updated it, I guess.
I
Sorry.
updated that. Yes, that is updated, Rich.
All right, my mistake.
No problem.
A lot of changes.
All right. Moving on to the section for benefits to the community. Again, I don't recall much comment for this section here. Is everybody good with the benefits to the community section? Go ahead, Kate.
The only thing I would add here is when Jeff was talking about traffic,
Yes.
maybe add that as under upgrade the school facilities as one of the additional items in the parentheses.
You're saying up here.
Like improve traffic patterns. And the other thing I had was in the next paragraph. When it says that as the process developed, we also thought about doing a fiscally responsible plan. I think that's a little bit misleading because that's part of our mission statement. That was like one of the initial things that we had talked about because it's in the mission.
I was actually thinking that shouldn't we have our mission statement
Yes, actually, there was a.
at the beginning?
Yeah, let me just comment on. Let me fix this up first, Ann, and then I'll get to that because there was another comment as far as what we should include in the beginning. Hang on. It's a process development in the various I guess does this
Let's reword that, Chuck.
yeah, it doesn't
We gotta
read right
wordsmith
to me, I
that.
guess.
Let's just wordsmith that a bit and change it around.
Got it. All right, sorry. And yeah, I actually meant to mention that at the beginning is should we have on the inside of the cover, and Don, I think this was a comment you had as well, was prior to the table of contents, if we had a sheet that had the mission statement and then a roster of the school modernization committee. Was that right?
Yeah, I felt that the mission statement and a list of all the members of this committee should be listed somewhere.
Does anybody disagree? We'll include a sheet with a mission statement and a roster.
Sounds good.
What about, not to open a can of worms, what about members who are no longer with us, but who did a lot of work?
Nope.
Yeah. I don't know what to do there.
No, I don't either. So
It's members as at the time that we're presenting this proposal.
Yeah, I think it's members that are submitting the report. If I had to guess. Everybody good with that? The 12 members as we currently sit? Go ahead, Matt.
No, I'm good with it. And now that those people that are no longer with us are private citizens, I would say if you were going to try to include them, you should get their permission before you publish anything and send anything forward to the town council. That would just be my suggestion.
Thank you. I propose it's just the mission statement as it's was given to us, and then the 12 current members of the SMC. Is anybody opposed to that?
That makes perfectly good sense. We're the ones that are presenting the final presentation.
Very good. Get back to where I was then. All right. Onto the financial analysis.
I had
Jim
one,
Jask-
I had one
Yeah,
more
go
thing
ahead.
for the prior page.
Go ahead, Kate. Sorry about that.
Sorry, where it says an independent firm was hired by the communications subcommittee, shouldn't it be selected? Because the town actually paid for them. The communications subcommittee just selected them, correct?
Yeah, I got you. Semantics here, right? Good. Matt, did you? I thought I saw your hand go up too.
Yes, but I had the same concern. The SMC subcommittee cannot hire anyone. Only this full commission could. So
Yep.
I agree completely that, that should at best be reworded, if not some of it removed.
Are you good with it being an independent firm selected by the SMC Communications Subcommittee? Yes.
Okay, is that page done?
That's page 21 of 56. Maybe of 55. I might not have deleted those. All right, finally, not finally, I guess section 4, the financial analysis. Again, this was broken up as far as the recommended scenario 6, because at this point we've made our recommendation in here. So first, just with scenario 6, and then the same information is shown or included in the report with 2A. So this information, again, the comments were to include phase 1 costs, cash flow, as well as the full plan. So we'll see that on the next couple of sheets. Was there any comments on the details through the financial analysis? The budgets should reflect the latest that we had looked at. Go ahead, Kate.
Sorry, it's me again. A couple times in this, we flip-flop between past tense and present tense. So if John could just kind of look through and make sure like there's an is on here. But my biggest one is on the chart at the bottom. It lists the estimated district share as 88.2, but the one that I have from the meeting says 86.6. What changed?
The cost of the land that we included in there, I believe at the last one, we didn't have that land price in there and they included it in this
Correct.
one. So it went up that one, whatever it was.
Okay, thank you.
A lot of versions here to keep tracks.
That's correct, right, John, Chuck?
Yes, that was the reason for the difference is the cost for the land that was added in the latest version.
Gotcha. That's what I had assumed. All right. Again, this should reflect what we have seen as far as budgets. This was the new information for the cash. Oh, go ahead, Kate. Did you have another one on the previous sheet?
It actually is on the same chart for scenario 2. That number is the same as it was before. Should we also add the land to that one to make it consistent? I'm sorry, it's in appendix 6, but it's the same issue. Or do you want me to wait to bring it up later?
I'll just make a note. We'll look at it when we get there and I'll put a cloud on it. Good. All right, so looking at the cash flow, this is new from the last meeting. The final budgets were provided to Jim Jascott from John. He had run the scenarios again for all of the phases of each scenario. And then he broke down today just the phase 1 of the scenario. Go ahead, Matt. Did you have a?
Beef that up a little bit. You had it up and then it went back down.
Yeah, I was going to zoom back in. So this
Thank
is
you.
this is the phase 1 information. Jim, I know you joined the meeting. I don't know if you want to give a
Sure.
quick high level summary of what we
So,
had done
so
here.
this one you have on the screen, this is phase 1, 2, and 3. Just for comparison purposes, but while it's up here, basically I just took the cash flow provided by Colliers, that's in that projected cash flow column, just molded into the timetable that we would normally issue bonds, but the total 492 million is, basically the same total cash flow for all 3 phases that Colliers projected. The second column are the grants that were anticipated, so that's an offset. And then for this particular scenario, there was also consideration for renovation of Humiston. So I put in some extra bonding for that for 14 million. And then finally, the scenario 6 column is the total of those 3, or the net of those 3, really.
Yep. Got it. And then you did the same for phase 1 only.
For phase 1 only. So for phase 1 only, there were, I didn't include any consideration for Humiston renovations. Talked to John about that, and we both felt that really wasn't part of phase 1. So this is just focusing on the 2 new K-6 elementary schools. And you could see that the timeline was only 3 years for that. So now these are just projecting out, the bond principal and interest over the lifetime of these projects. So it's, basically the term of the projects, which I think was like 12 or so years, plus another 20 years of amortization of the bonds, principal and interest. So again, this is all 3 phases. So you could see, you're adding interest in here basically from the project cost for the bonding that was projected.
And then you did the same thing again for just phase one.
Just phase one. And, I guess I have some questions or look for some feedback from all of you. If you look in the, starting with year 2047, I'm actually running into some negative numbers on the right side of the page, but that's because the bonding from the project itself, the phase one project, is completed in 2046. So, maybe I should, for phase one presentation, and maybe I should just stop wherever the phase one costs are stopping and eliminate that portion on the bottom, if that makes sense. And even at that, I guess I'm a little concerned about the average that's shown at the bottom of that chart. I don't know, is that showing up on the bottom? Yeah. I may need to tweak that a little bit based on the number of years that is end up showing in this phase one scenario versus phases 1, 2, and 3. I'm not sure. Maybe that average annual cost is going to confuse people. Maybe I should just highlight the high and low over the various years that we're presenting. It's something else I was giving some thought to, because I guess the bottom line is one average cost is over, say, a 32 or 33 year period, and this one would, if it was just phase one, it would probably be over only approximately a 22 year period.
Got it.
So if anybody has any suggestions.
Got it. So at a high level, are there any comments for the financial part? Don, I see your hand first.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Hey, Jim, you did add the CIP costs in Humiston for the full scenario,
Right.
and you put it in the first 4 years, but you didn't put it in. So
it's not in the phase one, no.
Right. So but why are we putting it in the first 4 years if it's not going to be in? I don't know. I just think that I don't think we can go too far in phase one without it. So I'm almost suggesting that we might have to put something in there if we're going to. I'm sure it's going to need some work in the next 3 to 5 years. The other thing is, since we don't, we probably won't make the June 1st deadline for the state. But if we do get a referendum in November, do you build in any carrying costs there, or do you have to build in any carrying costs because we're going to have to front the money before we get any reimbursement?
Chuck, you want to clarify that a little bit for Jim?
As far as basically if we don't go to submit a grant application this year, it'll have to be in 2022, which means, and if you pass referendum this November, essentially means we would have to carry all our soft costs from, say, November or whenever we start accruing through essentially August or September of 2023. It's about 1.5 years worth of soft costs before we get reimbursed.
So if I need to adjust when we're getting grant reimbursement, that's easy enough to do. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, that's what I was trying, because if we don't make the deadline, but we make the referendum, there's going to be some kind of carrying cost, I assume.
Yeah.
With that.
That's easy enough to fix.
Okay.
As far as adding Humiston renovation costs in both scenarios, including it in the phase one only,
I'm not. I asked the rest of the committee what they think, but if we're putting it in the first 4 years of the full scenario, but we don't have anything in phase one. Are we not going to touch Humiston at all?
Yeah. So if I could, we've talked obviously at length about Humiston, and the final phasing for each of the scenarios did not include it in phase one of either one. So I would actually propose you go the opposite direction with it and not include it in the phase one only scenario for the presentation.
Okay.
And in the phase 1 through 3 cash flow that you have here, put it at least into phase 2 for fairness between the two scenarios. Does anybody disagree with that? That's what we've discussed thus far.
I would move it. Yeah, I would move those 4 years down further than just so people don't get confused.
Got it. On a high level with the cash flows, is there any question? I think Jim's looking for some feedback on the phase 1 only. Again, if I could, I would say yes, we would only show it through 2046 and
Right, 'cause I
eliminate
think
these
that-
lines where it shows as a negative because it affects the average, and maybe just highlight the high and the low and not show an average because it's thrown off, it's skewed by the latter years. Does
I
anybody
agree.
else have any comment?
That makes sense to me.
You're going to leave going down to that point, though, you're going to leave the monthly cost to average taxpayers intact, correct? You're just not going to summarize it?
I think you're going to eliminate the 2047 through 54 rows, but you're going to leave the rest of this report intact. Is that right, Jim?
Yeah, I think you had it right, Matt.
Yep, thank you.
And then, the average annual cost at the bottom, I wasn't sure if I wanted to show that really in either version, only in that where each version has a different number of years that it's being divided by. And I don't know if that would skew it a little bit. Or I could leave it based on the number of years in each scenario.
I think as an average, if you leave it as the number of years that are included in the scenario, that kind of takes care of what you're doing, as
Okay.
long as you get rid of these negative numbers that may be skewing it a little.
Okay, sounds good.
Does anybody disagree?
I wanted to point out too, there is a column here for let's see, savings from operations, but also under debt service, the second column was projections for other Board of Ed capital projects. And, I don't know if this muddies the water or not. Obviously, when we're addressing some of these schools in this particular scenario, there's going to be other project costs for the other schools that are not getting addressed. I can say that for what I updated in the phase 1 versions, we did not have time to update the other Board of Ed project costs, so I just carried those from the phase 1 through 3 scenario, if that makes sense, just for now, for comparison purposes. But frankly, these other Board of Ed capital project costs, there were a lot of assumptions there about what was going to be done and when it was going to be done. And I just don't know if all of that is going to confuse things, like almost too much information at this point, or just leave it in because it does represent something for other costs other than what's involved in this scenario.
Go ahead, Don.
I think it's important to leave in only because I think people need to see that, there will be additional costs besides just the school modernization end of it. And I think they have to see that, that there could be additional costs. I think it's kind of important to leave in there.
Okay.
Thank you, Don. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I'm disagreeing. I think that the average taxpayer is going to go over to the right-hand side to take a look at the additional cost of doing these projects and their impact on my mill rate. And these are costs that would be there no matter what. These are costs that are going to be in the budget, whether we do these projects or not. They're not costs that are generated by our school modernization plan. And I think that this $27 million just makes it seem like our plan is much more expensive than it is.
Thank you, Rich. Does anybody else have a thought one way? Go ahead, Andrew.
I agree with Rich on that, because if you're going to put other BOE capital projects, then you should be putting other town capital projects in there as well.
Got it. Thank you, Andrew. Matt, did you same comment?
Andrew stole my my thunder again. Yeah, that's exactly right. Just putting Board of Ed projects in without putting some sort of something in for town projects, I don't think is
Maybe we should then.
conducive. I do understand Don's thoughts that there are going to be more projects and there are going to be more costs, and that I can actually see both sides of it, but if you're going to leave it, I think we should put something in for the town side of it also. If not, it could be confusing, but I see Don's point.
Thank you, Matt.
Is this going? This is going to the town council anyway. I mean, this is a report, but I assume it's going to be made public. So, I mean, we've had this discussion during council meetings about, it's not just the school modernization that we're worried about. I mean, we're looking at a 1.9 mil increase this year, and there's a number of other projects that we have to look at. So I think it's important for the public to understand that, there are a lot of things coming down the road, and how this could affect it, because just that number on the right is only going to affect it if we just do the scenario without doing all these other projects that we have to do.
The number on the right indicates what is the cost of the school modernization plan.
Right, correct. That's what I just said.
Yeah. But
So
these other projects aren't part of our plan. These are things that would be going on whether we did a plan or didn't do a plan. You're going to have to put a new window into the high school over the next several years. That's got nothing to do with our plan.
Well, Rich, if I could, I think I can see both sides of it as well, because it is part of our plan, because we're not addressing things like that early on in the project. So it is a cost that, if the plan was different, maybe it would be lessened or avoided. I think the problem, from my opinion, of including it the way it is it's not really reflective of just the phase one, as Jim was saying. So I would actually think that if we're just looking at a bottom line cost for scenario 6, maybe exclude it for now, with the understanding that, yes, obviously there's other Board of Ed expenses or capital project expenses, let's say, that will be included, but we're just looking at the buildings proposed with the cash flow. That's my opinion.
right. Plus the Humiston aren't included in that capital projects either. So
as if I could just add, as part of the capital expenditure plan, which technically we're kind of taking a look at that now with the council for the 22 plan. At some point, whatever is brought forward is going to be added in to that capital expenditure plan. And that capital expenditure plan has all the town and Board of Ed projects. And as the council goes through it, it's going to have to, probably with the help of the Board of Education, determine which projects in that plan might be able to be eliminated as a result of the scenario that's brought forward. So, I think through that process, we're going to get to a point where we're going to have, debt service projections for everything. But I'm just not so sure at this point. Maybe it makes sense just to focus on the actual scenario 6 project costs or 2A project costs. So kind of
Got it.
leaning towards the Chuck end of, what you said. But certainly I understand both sides of the argument.
Got it. So if we can
Jim, a
try
quick,
and go for it. Who had the comment there?
Jeff.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Jim, the numbers in the other Board of Ed capital projects, I'm sorry, could you repeat how you came up with that? Is that out of our
Yeah.
requests?
So there's a footnote. I don't know if down below it says a little bit. So, basically, Vin provided his most recent capital expenditure plan projects that was approved by the Board of Ed recently and submitted to the council for their review along with the rest of the capital budget. And then he projected out costs going forward because, we only do a 5-year capital plan.
Right.
And he
But
projected out.
those costs, that plan is only funded at like 50%. So is that
Yes.
figured into this or no?
It is. I think he figured it in to fiscal years 27 through 34. For purposes of the scenario, when he took the average Board of Ed capital expenditures, he reduced it by 50% in the out years.
Thank you for that clarification. The other point is I think that, a taxpayer is going to want to know the cost of any project. What is the cost of the project to me? This I don't think accurately reflects the cost of the project. Even, I could even make an argument about backing out capital or the operation savings. I mean,
I don't argue with that either at this point, but
Yeah.
at some point you are, you're probably going to need to take a look at that as well. I just don't know.
Right.
This is, for this presentation, if you want to get into all of that.
I guess for a consideration of moving through the financial stuff here, how do we want to treat the cash flow scenarios? I think the one option is to leave them as is and include these other BOE capital projects the way it's shown, which gives you the number that includes those, or to take it out. Do we have, anybody have any feelings?
Yeah.
Go
Chuck,
ahead.
I can't see you on the screen, but
I'm right here.
I think this is Sylvia, and I think that we should be presenting the projects at the cost of the project now without factoring in the capital expenditures. Once we have that figure, then we can, as the Board of Ed goes through it and the council goes through it, and we have public information sessions, we can determine how that's going to fall into a capital expenditure plan, which includes the town capital expenditure plan that we have that goes out 5 years. Board of Eds, I think, goes out 5 years or 4 at least. And take a closer look of how those are going to change on the Board of Ed side by building a new facility, what will be taken off and what we don't have to do. I think the public, I think, Jeff, I think it was you that you were speaking, needs to know the cost of the project. And then once we have a sense of what the cost of the project is, then we fit it into our budget and see what the tax impact is going to be. And all of that will come out after the Board of Ed has gone through their ed specs and we've finalized the plans a little more carefully. And that will be the subject of the referendum. And there'll be plenty of time to be able to substantiate all of those numbers as the referendum is presented. So for this initial presentation, as we are doing it now, I would not include those capital expenditure extra things. I would keep it simple and just say, what is the cost of this phase 1 project?
Thank you, Sylvia. So just to summarize, you would be in favor of taking this out. I guess, can we agree or come to a consensus? Does anybody feel we should leave it in?
I'm fine with removing it.
Remove-
I think my only thinking was, some of those capital improvements might be, if it's something to do with Chapman or Norton or Darcy, and we won't be paying those costs because we're going to be shuttering those. But I understand their side of it, where let's just show the project directly, and that's fine.
Okay. So if we take it out, is everybody okay with that? Is anybody against that?
No.
We'll take out that column from both cash flows, which will update the numbers along the side. Good.
And along with that, Chuck, the savings from operations, do we want that in there at this point? Kind of a similar situation, I think.
So the savings from operations, forgive me, how was that calculated in the, this 365 numbers the same for years 2025 through the end? How is that briefly included?
Excuse me, that, Chuck, that was a calculation that Vin had projected and determined based on savings from Darcy being, offline. So savings on, electrical, water usage, a couple of the, personnel, positions that would be eliminated. That's what that, adds up to there.
So it sounds to me like that's better defined and pretty clear in both scenarios that Darcy is closed. It would make sense to keep that in there, in my opinion. Does anybody think differently there?
Just boost that up again, would you please?
I'm sorry.
Whoa. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is anybody opposed to leaving that in?
I was scrolling and looking at some other thing. What is the question? Sorry, Chuck.
The question is whether we should include the savings from operations, which John explained as the cost provided by Vin for closing Darcy, the savings from closing Darcy in terms of building maintenance costs and some positions there. The idea I had of keeping it in was that's pretty well defined, I guess, in both scenarios that Darcy is closed in phase one of both. It would make sense, in my opinion, to leave it in. But again, it's open.
Is that typical to carry something like that out over 30 years or something? I don't know. Maybe it is, but
Yeah, and the only reason why I did it was to kind of tie into the timeline of the overall, in this case, 32 years that was in the phase 1 through 3. But that's a good question, is how meaningful those numbers might be in the out years.
Yep.
I just think that number 10,975,000 could be a little deceiving when they look at it. Well, look, we're going to save that much money over the next 30 years.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's pros and cons.
Yep.
And the other argument about, in favor of taking it out, and don't stab me for mentioning this, but in this other scenario, I know that, Jim Jinks had asked the question about with a 6 through 8 middle school and 1 elementary school, wouldn't that be sufficient to address the enrollment needs? And the response back was, well, maybe it wouldn't. It might be a little bit of room, but too much pressure with the 105 students from Darcy. Well, if Darcy were to remain open, would that be more feasible? I mean, if that's still even a thought at all, then I would think removing it might make sense.
Thank you, Jeff. Without getting into the details of the scenarios, I guess where we're at right now is we're closing Darcy in both scenarios, and we're not at a point where we're revisiting the details of them. Is that right? So go ahead, Matt. I saw your hand, and then Jim after that.
Are you saying that just savings from operations from Darcy School is 365,800 per year?
It's a question for Vin.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Vin.
Yeah, I was going to say the schedule that we had provided and we came up with that, we had elimination of 3 positions, a school nurse, a secretary, building maintainer, telephone and internet services, property and liability insurance, building maintenance, cleaning services. When you total it up, it was 365,850.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, I just saw operations 2. I didn't know if you had 2 schools in there or 1. I was just looking for a clarification.
Oh, yeah, the 2 is just
The 2's a
reference
footnote.
footnote.
Yep.
Okay,
Well, technically, those numbers would actually should be going up because, as you know, over 30 years, salaries go up and costs of everything are going up. I mean, you could really put
Want me to put maybe a 2.5%?
I just think that it has to go up somewhat because it's, you know, what it costs in 2025 is going to be a lot less than what it will cost in 2054.
Or maybe 2% to be conservative.
Yeah, maybe.
Jim Jinks, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was going to suggest we take that out. I just think I think it would be confusing, and I also think we're kind of not including other savings and other Board of Ed capital expenditure costs now. It just seems to me to be cleaner if we remove those savings. When it comes down to it, it's 365,000, which isn't going to change these numbers, that much.
Oh, it's 11 million on the bottom though, right? I guess
On
you're
the
saying
bottom, I know,
on
but
the line.
but-
Yeah, I got you.
But we don't know. I mean, that 11 million on the bottom is not really 11 million either.
Is anybody opposed to just striking it from there altogether? And we're really just looking at the scenario 6 costs and the debt service from it. Is everybody good with that?
I would strike it. Darcy the building might not last until 2050 something. So to put that number in until 2054 is not realistic.
All right, so we'll do the same with all of these done as far as the operations. Last call. Good. All right.
One other
Go
thing.
ahead. Go ahead, Rich.
On the page before that, we have $2.5 million in there for Chapman demolition. In scenario 6, we're building on a different piece of land and just turning over Chapman to the town, just as we are with Darcy. So why are we carrying a $2.5 million? The page before this one. There it is. So why are we carrying a $2.5 million cost there?
The conversation did come up this afternoon with John.
Me? Yep.
Yeah. John, I don't know if you have anything to.
Trying
add
to,
on that.
the
We struggled
reasoning
with
behind that, I believe, was the fact that more than likely the school would not be able to be reused. And because of the existing conditions and the challenges that are within the facility itself. And I believe the assumption was that it would be raised in order to sell that property and have it be used for some other purpose. I mean, that can come out easily enough, certainly.
Well, it just seems to me that, I don't know if we're being consistent here. I don't know if Darcy can be reused. I don't know if Chapman can be reused. I don't know if Chapman could be sold. As I said, I think from our point of view, we're handing it off to the town. And then the town can do with it as
True.
they want. They might actually make money off of it by selling it to a developer or something. I don't know that we should be caring. It's one thing if we're building on that property and have to knock the building down, as we are with Norton. But I think it's
Right.
a different scenario if we're just abandoning the property.
I agree with Rich. Like, it's beyond the scope of this committee to decide what to do with the Chapman building once we've decided to build a new school. So I think that column should come out of both this table and the table below it.
Does anybody disagree with that? I tend to agree myself. Everybody good? Strike it from both.
Yep.
So it's going to greatly simplify, I think, these projections and really get to the heart of the cost of the project itself, which maybe is not a bad thing.
It's what we like to do, Jim. We wait to the end to simplify it for you.
Exactly.
After he's done all the work.
All right. Everybody good on the financial pieces there. We'll make similar comments on the scenario 2A stuff that we'll look at quickly in the appendices part. All right, on to the conclusions and recommendations section of the report. Again, it restates the scenario, includes the redistricting information from SLR, and then this would be the section where we would beef up the recommendation part. Bear with me a second. Get through the.
On page 13, I think, Chuck.
Yeah, I was just gonna make a new blank page so I could write on
okay.
it.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. All right. So as far as the recommendation, we talked about the scorecard information, and then Don, you had made a comment as far as scenario 6 shutter addressed, I guess. 3 out of the 4 oldest buildings. Was that summarized right?
Yeah, we'll be addressing 3 out of the 4 oldest facilities.
Got it. Does anybody else have any additional comments for? Yeah, go ahead, Kate.
I think this should be like our summary of all the facts and data that we've had through the whole report. So percent of students that get redistricted, a restatement just in a line of what the phase 1 cost high-low would be. The fact that this one has the 4 elementary schools become more even, more balanced. Like Don said, I like it, maybe put in, instead of saying it addresses the old facilities, maybe talk about what the average school age is before this project and the average school ages after the project, just to kind of put that data. The OSCG and our recommendation about elementary school size and the size of the elementary schools that we're recommending being built, like just kind of bringing all those pieces together into either one list or one table.
I agree with you, Kate. I think it needs to be stated positive. Everything needs to be in positive verbiage, and not complaining about old things, but we are bringing you new this, new that, whatever it is. I think it needs to be positively stated.
Another piece from, and it's in the SLR when they did the scenario 6 redistricting, they also talk about how the enrollment growth gets spread across the 4 schools with scenario 6. So it's not a lot of new coming into one school, but it's more balanced across the 4 schools.
Does anybody else have any comments, additions? be honest, just throw like 2 or 3 of the ones that I was thinking of myself.
The total redistricting, Kate, is less impacted by this scenario than by some others. Is that correct? Am I remembering that we're looking at impacting
Yeah.
8%? Was that the
Scenario 1A was like 40-something%.
Right.
2A is 15%, and this one is 18%. So 2A
Right.
and
So-
6 are fairly close on this one.
Right, but
Yeah, that's right. 18 was scenario 6, 15 scenario 2A, and 1A was like 40 and change.
yeah.
I think the OSCGNR input is important because for me, that was like a huge determining factor when I'm looking at scenario 6 and scenario 2A, was that the elementary plan was within the OSCGNR recommendations and 2A was outside of it without a lot of additional, work that had to be done. So I just think that that's important to say because I think it's important to understand.
Got it. Does anybody else have anything in addition to the list for the recommended scenario? Go ahead, Jim.
Well, this is probably not the right time to bring it up. I feel like we should be, before we even really complete this conclusions and recommendations for the recommended scenario, we should be having kind of a full treatment of option 2A in the report rather than the appendices. I think it's an unfortunate treatment of 2A to leave it not really kind of in the body of the report. I mean, we should have someone from the public as we're looking to compare and contrast these two proposals. We certainly have in here that we've recommended one over the other, but by having 2A in the appendices without really much of a write-up and not giving it, to me, kind of a fuller analysis, that to me is, I think if there's any attorneys in the room, I think that's called prejudicial. I just think that we should be, I think in an earlier version of this, both were in the body of the report. I didn't notice it was kind of 2A was moved to the appendices until this latest version.
Yeah, so in the first version of the draft, it was included in the body of the report, and they were presented equally throughout the report. There was no recommendation. It wasn't really clear that the recommendation was scenario 6 over 2A. And again, as we discussed throughout, we were going to recommend a scenario and provide an alternate or secondary option, which I believe is accomplished in the draft version here, this revised final draft. We've recommended scenario 6. We've talked about scenario 2A throughout and how we went through the scoring of that, how it modified. And then we talked about the OSCGNR input as well. And then we present our recommended scenario 6. The information on scenario 2A is still included in the report as an appendix because it's not the recommended scenario.
But it's given the impression that it's not really a viable option either.
I wouldn't agree with that myself. I mean, if it wasn't a viable option, it would be the way of the other 11 that weren't viable options. It's still included in the report. I mean, does anybody feel strongly that it should be moved up through in? Go ahead, Matt, I see your hand, and then Rich.
Yeah, I don't think that it has to be moved up. I think by moving it up, it could be confusing. And really, the only way that if you're going to include it, there should be an asterisk there that the state of Connecticut is I don't know how you're going to state it, but it should be stated that it was not one of their top choice is to build a 1,200 student middle school.
Yeah, but we've discussed that the state of Connecticut said that, and if we were to get, I mean, if we go, obviously we're going to get a lot of public feedback on this as well. The public comes back and it seems like they would still prefer a 6th-day middle school. Then presumably the Board of Ed is going to come up with some way of addressing a larger 6th-day middle school. It isn't just because the state says it isn't within their preferred range. It's not, we've talked about it, it's not necessarily a done deal in terms of going forward.
That's why it's left in. That's why it's mentioned.
Yeah, I just think it's wrong to have it in the appendices. To me, it should be a part of it's, we talk about the 2 scenarios throughout, and then all of a sudden it's relegated to the back of the report. That just doesn't seem right to me.
Well, it's all going back to you guys anyway, to town council, so.
But it's also going to the public. It isn't just going to the town council.
Go ahead, Rich, and then Ann, and then I think Don, you'd wanted to say something. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah, I agree with Jim on this. It hasn't gone to any kind of public hearing at this point. I thought when I read the original report, and both of them were there, although it clearly stated that our recommendation was to go with scenario 6, that was clear to me. I was a little surprised when I saw that it had been moved into the appendix. And as Jim said, I felt that the message there was that it really wasn't particularly viable.
Thanks, Rich. Go ahead, Ann.
I also agree that it shouldn't just be put at the end of the report. We keep going back to the state recommendations, but the reality is the state also recommended that that the public has some input on what we're putting forth, and if a 6th through 8 middle school that's bigger than what they like to see in a middle school, the message that I got from the report, or from what was reported to us, was that if it's right for Cheshire, then we need to make the case that it's right for Cheshire, and here's why. Not that you can't do this or you can't do that. We all agreed that, even before the state told us, that a 900 elementary school was not, it just wasn't very palatable to anybody. We didn't really need the state recommendation to tell us that. But we weren't thinking that, a bigger middle school, because of the way that middle schools are designed to be smaller communities within a bigger, within a whole community. We were never thinking that, we couldn't justify a bigger middle school. And yet all of a sudden, we just kind of dropped that from the choices. And I don't think that's right. I think we have 2 choices here, and we should be presenting both of them.
Got it. I understand you think that, and it's been very clear that you want 2 choices, but we've talked about that several times now. And we can go back however many meetings we want to, and we talked about a recommended scenario and a secondary option. And I think that's what's presented in the report. I can hear maybe moving it up in the report, but we're still making a recommendation. We're not picking between 2 scenarios and saying we have 2 equally viable options. That's not what we did as a committee. And we've talked about that a lot. Go ahead, Kate. And then, sorry, Don, you're next.
I agree with everything you said, but the only thing I'm thinking is, what if we rename appendix to alternative solution? Like, because we had a recommended and then we had an alternate. So maybe if we reworded it, it would look less like a afterthought. And then maybe that table that we're making, the percent of redistrict, the phase 1 cost, the OSCG and our recommendation and the size in the 8-year high size, maybe we make a similar list for in the beginning of that section before we do the estimate, all the cost estimates, so people can kind of look at apples to apples.
So you're saying right now we have section, I can pull it back up here. Hang on a second. We have section
6.
5, which is conclusions and recommendations. We would add a section 6 that would be alternate, or however we want to word it, solution.
I don't know if that would make the people who don't like the way it looks in an appendix, if that would make it more palatable to them. But I think that information that we're putting in our recommendation, I do think we need to put it with scenario 2 so people can see how much more expensive the phase 1 is, how not aligned with the OSCG and our recommendations. I think they need to see that comparison with the 2 scenarios.
So if we make it a section 6 and include the similar chart to what we're summarizing in the recommendation, is that right? Don, did you have comment as well?
Yeah, I
trying
did.
to pull this back up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple things. First, I mean, like you said, Chuck, we all decided to submit one scenario and have a backup. And I mean, Ann, if you're so headstrong on submitting 2, you were the only one who voted not to move forward scenario 6. So, I mean, I don't know which way you're going on that one. But, in terms of public input, believe me, this is not the end. As it goes forward to the Board of Ed and to the Town Council, there will be times for the public to give us their input on these scenarios. We're not just going to take one of these and just pass it forward. And at the end of the day, it will be up to the public when it goes to a referendum. The referendum is going to be the public's choice, and so I'm not, I think we're doing what we all voted on doing. I agree with Kate, maybe changing the wording on it is a good way to fix that. So it shows that this was our alternate choice. But I mean, I disagree with, I think the people who wanted to push a middle school are trying to grasp onto something like, but this is not what the committee had voted on. And I think we need to continue moving forward with what we had decided on. So that's my opinion.
If we were to include that, sorry, Jim, hang on one second. If we were to include that as a section 6 and call it alternate, is that better? Does that address what you're looking for? I guess that's for Ann, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, if it's to me, sure. I think alternate scenario, alternate solution, whatever, that's fine with me. I'm looking at this from the standpoint of a voter, from the standpoint of a taxpayer, trying to understand the 2 scenarios side by side. That's what I'm looking at this as. I'm not looking at this as, which one do I want? I'm just we're putting out a product from this committee. This is all the work that we've done for the past, some of you guys have been here for, since November of 2019, for God's sake. Now, I want to put out a complete report. Yes, we said we were going to have a recommended. Yes, we said we were going to have a secondary. But the expression of one in the appendix with no narrative whatsoever is not a secondary recommendation or not a secondary plan. It's just like backup information. That's the way it's going to be perceived. And I don't think we should be putting out to the public basically a report that in the current form and the current kind of positioning of these scenarios is kind of stacking the deck for one over the other. I don't think that the public is going to want that. And I think it'd be doing the public a disservice. So an alternative scenario, or however we want to change the heading, that'd be great.
Got it. Hang on one second, Sylvia.
That's right.
And similar question. I mean, if we had put it as section 6 alternate scenario as we have it here, is that suffice?
I think that's a better solution than calling it the appendix. And I'll be honest with you all, I don't appreciate that you saying that I'm trying to push an agenda of a 6 through 8 middle school. I am also reporting, I hear a lot from people in the public, and they are expecting to see choices and discussion about more than one scenario put forth. And somehow we've gotten to a place where, well, we're not really putting more than one scenario forth, where this is it,
Then why did you vote? Then why did you vote against moving scenario 6 through?
Because we were in the 11th hour, and I thought that we
But
needed
that's
to
not,
get
you're
a
going
report.
against what you're saying, Ann. You just said you think we should be pushing 2. There were
John,
2
I don't need
scenarios.
to have this conversation with you publicly. I'm happy to talk with you about it offline.
All right, Ann, whatever you want to do. I just trying to figure
Yeah,
this out.
I don't appreciate the way that you
That-
speak to me publicly. I would appreciate
that-
it if you showed me a little more respect.
I believe
right.
I am, Ann. Sorry.
All right, Sylvia, did you have comments?
Yes, I do. And I think we could put this to bed very neatly by listening to Kate's suggestion. I think there is merit to having 2 scenarios that public can look at and understand how we made our recommendation for one over the other. I think she's correct in having an area there where we can provide the information for the alternative solution that compares and does a list similar to the other one and shows clearly the reasons why we chose one over the other. And I think it's respectful to all of the people who want to have some input. It gives the Board of Education and the council a template of how we arrived at where we arrived at. But I think it should clearly state we're recommending scenario 6, and this is an alternative. And as you deliberate, you can look at why we found these places acceptable. I don't appreciate the back and forth conversation about personal information here. The project that we're presenting is simply a scenario and an alternative. That's what we voted on. That's what we should do. It should not be in the appendix. It should be part of the in a section 6 or whatever number it is at this point. And Kate has been very thoughtful about her recommendations all the way through this, and I absolutely support her thing. And I think that's
Very good. So we will relabel this
right
into section 6, alternate scenario, include the information that we have here. We are going to take out, this is going to move down into years 4 through 8. Similarly, Chapman demolition will come out, and the other columns in the cash flow itself will be removed accordingly. Sorry, go ahead, Rich.
Well, the only question I have on the Humiston property is that under scenario 6, you end up with an empty dot. And there's really no reason for us to keep Humiston and pour.
Real quick, under scenario 2A, you end up with the empty dot.
2A, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So I believe that Humiston column should come out of there altogether.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think when we had talked about these scenarios themselves, that's like a pending of phase 2, right? Because the only way we had saw moving it into Humiston or moving Humiston into Dodd was if phase 2 included like an elementary school renovation that would populate Dodd as well. We talked that you couldn't just move Humiston, Board of Ed, and the alt high school into Dodd on its own due to the space.
No, I
So
know
that's
that.
why it's separate.
Yeah, but I know like even early in the process, I had raised the question of Dodd, and Sylvia had said at that time that she thought that the town may have some real needs for that space also. So, I mean, it's quite possible that Dodd would remain owned by the town, used by maybe some of the departments in the town, but leaving space for, the alt ed and the district to, my guess is, and I know Don has mentioned this multiple times, that people really on the town council would like to see Humiston closed down rather than put a lot of money into it. And I just don't think in the end, we would end up putting that kind of money into Humiston if we had an empty Dodge sitting there.
Understood. I think it's quite possible, but it's again outside of the realm of the school modernization to say what happens with Dodd empty at that point. And we've talked about Humiston's not in phase one to treat it equal with the other scenario. It should be represented equally in the cash flows. The same. That's just kind of aligning again with what we've discussed. Go ahead, Kate, and then Andrew, and
Also on the top of this one, can you copy the whole description of the phase 2A scenario when you put the table, just like we did on the other one, just copy it from the prior page?
yes.
And in this one, thank you for getting big. Do you see where it says the high district share, low district share? That is the
Yes.
same number that we had previously and does not appear to include the cost for the land. So I'm hoping that that can be edited to reflect the cost of the middle school property and a possible new Chapman property.
Go ahead, Andrew. You had a comment?
Yeah, just real quick. I think that also in the introduction of the report that we should just put a sentence or two in there that says that this report presents our recommended scenario and the alternative scenario discussed by the committee can be found on X, just to kind of include it. Already mentioned in there.
In the table of contents, you mean?
No, just kind of where we start with the initial introduction verbiage. Well, definitely in the table of contents. I would just put something in there just so that it points to the second scenario, the alternative.
Alternate scenario may also be found following the recommendation. Does that sound right?
Good.
So you should call it the alternate scenario. Because we mention it. We mentioned two scenarios prior. There's the recommended scenario and then the alternate scenario.
I'll just say the following. Good. Going back to so the information with cost information with 2A updated similarly. We include the redistricting scenario there. And then we'll also include ahead of this similar summary table or a similar data summary, I guess, and copy and paste the description similar to the previous sheet that we had for 6. That gets us through the report. Then the appendices would start with the survey.
Yep.
And then finally, I think that was it, right?
That's it.
Crazy.
There we go. Very good. All right. Let me stop sharing then.
Nice job, everyone.
We're not done.
good
We still
work.
got
Oh, yeah, we're done.
a couple more agendas here. All right, moving on. Next is a quick discussion regarding presentation to the town council. So I've stopped sharing my screen, right? Okay. So presentation to the town council, in talking to Colliers, there will have the written report provided to the town council scheduled for Thursday, April 1st. And then our next meeting will be a joint meeting with the town council and Board of Ed on Monday, the 5th, where we'll make the presentation of the report and recommendation. So it is the intent of Colliers talking with them. We'll make a quick introduction to the report, the presentation, and our work over the last several months. And then Colliers will step through a slide presentation that details everything that's included in the amended report here. And then finally, there will be a Q&A session from that. Is there any questions, I guess, on the presentation to the town council? Everybody good? All right. Moving on to the next agenda item then. Public comment. Arnett, is there any public comment, new public comment?
I have not received any comments, and there are no comments in the inbox. As
I
of
think
now.
they were all watching the Yukon women beat Baylor.
At one point.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I just want to make a note in the survey results, the modernization survey results by CRPP, statement of confidentiality and ownership. School Modernization Committee, I don't think it's our property. I think it's the property of the town of Checker or the town council, but I don't think it's our property. School Modernization Committee is going to cease to exist very shortly, and I just don't. I find that it's not us, but it's the town of Cheshire or the town council that owns that.
Thank you. That's going back to the survey report there. I mean, I don't know. Rich, I think Matt is correct in that. Can we reach out to them and have that updated, or?
I mean, we've accepted the report.
Yeah.
We are a arm of the town council. We use town council approved money to pay for it. So my guess is that it would automatically be owned by the town council if it was something that we ran anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want, I can do it, but I'm not certain that it's
I don't know.
really essential.
I'd like to see it done.
Got it. Rich, can you reach out to them? It seems like it makes sense.
Yeah, I'll
maybe.
reach out to them. I don't know, hopefully you can get it before you got to submit this thing, but you're under a tight timeline.
That we are. Right, I will wrap up. There was no public comment. Last item would be adjournment of the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, Matt.
Second.
Who seconded?
Thank you, Jim. Jim Jinks was the second, Marilyn.
Thank you.
That is it.